Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 42. Hello and welcome to the show. My guest this week is the thought leader and president and co-founder of the Information Overload Research Group, Nathan Zeldes. A former physicist, Nathan led Intel Corporation in the search for improved productivity for knowledge workers for over 2 decades. Since 2009, he's focused on helping clients harness today's rapidly evolving technology without disrupting the all-important fabric of company culture and employee behavior. A key component in Nathan's work is mitigating the problem of email and information overload, which is harming productivity and also the quality of life of people everywhere. This is a problem that he identified in 1994. I hope you enjoy this episode with Nathan Zeldes. So, Nathan, welcome to Digital Mindfulness. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm really thrilled to have you here to be talking about all things related to information overload and how we use technology in the workplace. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
So Nathan, could you introduce yourself to the audience? What was your journey to be working so closely with information overload in particular?
Well, certainly a bizarre journey because I'm a physicist by education. And I started in applied physics. I spent most of my time at Intel. And I started there as a technologist, as an engineer, and then as a manager. And at some point, I realized that we were heading for trouble because we were replacing the mainframe terminals that people had with personal computers, IBM PCs. And it was obvious to me that nobody was paying any attention to the implications of that. And the way they did it is IT would come in the middle of the night and take away your terminal and plop a PC on your desk and put a check mark next to your name. And in the morning, when the employee came and started screaming, nobody was listening anymore. So I went to management and I said, this is a complicated machine. People don't know how to use it. We need to hold their hand. We need to have focus groups. We need to devise methodologies for how to interact with this technology more effectively. And I was fortunate in that management listened, and they allowed me to set up a very tiny, essentially R&D team that looked at behavior and technology and how they interface. So that brought me into this soft side of how people behave with technology. And then email overload happened, and it eventually became, I guess, my main area. I've worked at Intel for maybe 15 years on that. And then about 7 years ago, I left Intel and went my own way. And now I lecture and consult about this and related areas and basically have fun.
So, I mean, this is really, I mean, your career is absolutely fascinating. And I'm interested in the trend that you saw. I mean, it sounds like you saw this straight away in this change from mainframe computers to PCs. But were you really aware of just how much of a problem information overload would be once we started having personal computers?
Well, it just slapped me in the face, basically. What happens is I became what we called computing productivity manager, and I started putting attention into internet, and internet was new at the time and other things, and suddenly a friend of mine comes and reports to me that he heard a senior manager in one of our plants in Israel declare that he will delete any email that has any attachment. He was so upset with email. So being an engineer, I went to collect data and I started talking to managers, and I realized that on one hand, they had no idea how to use email effectively. And on the other, they were really inundated by email, even at that early stage. This would be 1994. So I saw an opportunity basically to address a problem. And that's where I got into this field.
So Nathan, what would you say is the main challenge that organizations face today with information overload? Like if you're in an organization now, where should they start to be looking at their problems with information overload?
Well, the problem with information overload is that it's about culture. And that's a problem because culture is much harder to fix than technology. I mean, the way I like to put it, consider why would anyone send emails at 2 a.m. in the morning that they know nobody's going to read anyway? And they know that nobody's going to read it because they're not reading the same stuff when others send it to them. And this is not because people are stupid. They're quite smart. They're doing it for very good reasons. Like, for instance, they want to be noticed, especially at certain times of the year. They want their managers to pay attention. They want to cover themselves in case of all sorts of problems. And believe me, I've seen every category of CYA, proactive CYA and preventive CYA, and so on. And all these things go to lack of trust in the organization. People don't trust their managers to reward them for good work unless they bombard them with email. People don't trust people to respond to what they're asking them to do unless they copy that person's manager, and so on. And the problem is all this lack of trust is what I call the dark side of information overload, because it's not easy for an organization to even admit that it has a problem of mistrust. Every organization does. But, we have an open door policy. We're all brothers and sisters in this place. How is it possible? And it is. So what companies really need to face is this challenge of admitting that they have a problem in culture, in the communication culture across the organization. And once they admit that, that's half the work, really. Then they can start addressing what the problem is.
Why do you think, Nathan, that we have this problem? Why do you think that we have this culture problem, as you put it, this lack of trust in employees to, or rather, what we have this lack of trust that we feel that we can only be perceived that we're working hard if we're sending hundreds of emails, or if we've got two screens with lots of windows open at once. Where do you think this culture comes from? Because it sounds quite frenetic.
Well, I would say that this is actually a nice illustration of the prisoner's dilemma, or the tragedy of the commons, if you will, because everybody would prefer for there to be less email. Nobody can afford to be the one to start sending less first, because the thought is if I send less, my next door neighbor in the next cubicle will send more and will get more noticed and rewarded. And one of the conditions for the prisoner's dilemma is that it's a kind of zero-sum game. And corporations today are meritocracies, so it's a zero-sum game.
I like that, and I like this whole link between quantity of email sent. That's we link that to, say, productivity, and then of course that links to merit. So we think if we produce more, then that must mean that I'm must mean that I'm doing better, and then I'll be perceived more favorably by my boss, or I'll be more in line for a promotion or something.
Oh, yeah. A friend of mine at work, at some point, we were having this discussion. What would happen if I succeed and make everybody so effective they can actually go home at 5 p.m.? And he said, forget it. If you can do that, then they will immediately start doing more work until they get as late as they can before their spouses throw them out of their homes. Because, again, everyone will want to do a little more than the other until it becomes impossible to do any more.
It's interesting though, isn't it, Nathan, how with the internet, we were promised, there was a lot of literature with people saying that we would be working less because we could produce more per hour. We would be working from home and there would be more time for play and with our loved ones. But this doesn't seem to be the case. We're producing more, but we're also working more.
That is certainly what's going on, yeah. I must say, I've been around long enough to remember life before email. And the way it used to be is you came to work in the morning, you actually did your correspondence, which involved, brown envelopes that took you maybe 15 minutes to go through. And then you worked and produced and created and did fun stuff if you were in a reasonable job until 5, 6, whatever. But then you went home and you couldn't work at home. There was no work there. So you had to be with your family and your hobbies and so on. And that is gone. Don't get me wrong, I actually am a geek, so I love technology. And I code computers for fun and whatnot. But nevertheless, I must admit that the change hasn't been for the better in the sense of how many hours you work and how stressful you can become because of it.
So what would you say then what are some of the impacts on employees or the organization when they suffer from information overload?
I would say, people usually think of the quantity of email. They say, oh my God, so much email, how terrible. And that's not the main thing. The way I divide it into four categories of damage. First is time. You lose time. At Intel, we characterized it, and it turns out that people spend about 20 hours a week what we call doing email, but not all of that is unnecessary. When you factor in the unnecessary part, it comes to about 1 day a week that people work, and they do it at full pay, zero satisfaction, zero benefit to anyone. So that's damage. That's time is money. The organization loses money. But then there's the other things. There is the loss of mental acuity. People become stupider when they're overloaded. There's a lot of research around that. You can dig some of it up on my website or wherever. But when you're overloaded, especially when you're interrupted all the time, then your effective IQ goes down. You're in a sense, it's the same situation as if you hadn't slept all night the night before. And one person I know defined it as continuous partial attention, which is you're always looking to see if a new email came in, you're always interrupted by your smartphone, and you can't focus on what you're doing. The result is worse decisions are being made, more mistakes are certainly being made, and you're less creative. There's even research showing that. So that's the second thing. People are unable to focus on doing smart work. Then there's the damage to key processes in the organization. For instance, meetings, which should be really where all the real work is being done. You think, you brainstorm, you create knowledge. Instead, people in meetings do nothing. They all do their email. They have that glassy look in their eyes as they peer at their Blackberries under the desk or at their screens above it. And nobody, including the manager who's supposed to make the decision at the end of the presentation, nobody's listening to the presenter. And that means that meetings are completely ineffective these days, which is pretty bad for the organization. And also look at management planning. Like when I was younger, there was management by objectives, which meant that at the beginning of each quarter, I would sit with my manager and we would decide what I'm supposed to do during this quarter. And I would put it on a piece of paper and stick it on my cubicle wall. And when somebody wanted me to do something for them, we'd take a look and see if I have spare bandwidth to do it, which I wouldn't. And then that person would have to go to my boss and negotiate. Today, all the guy has to do is send me an email asking me to fill a survey or do this or do that. And if they're lucky, I'm going to do it. And if they're not, they're going to send it to 10 people in parallel and they're going to find a sucker. So instead of being driven by planning, we're driven by interrupts, which is not good. And then there's the damage to quality of life, and I suppose I don't have to expand on that, right?
No, but it's interesting to know though your perspective on this and that link between information overload and the decrease in the quality of our lives.
Let me put it this way. A friend of mine once told me that he bought Harry Potter in ebook format. When I asked why, he said that way he can do his email while reading it to his son at bedtime. And yeah, it's sad. And we see a lot of that. There was a lovely article called BlackBerry Orphans in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago, which went into how the kids are responding, including one kid actually flushed her mom's BlackBerry down the toilet because they identify the enemy. They're not getting the attention they deserve. So it's bad. And of course, it's stressing people, and stress means health damage eventually, and burnout, and so on.
Would you say also, Nathan? I mean, this is maybe anecdotal, but would you say that knowledge workers are maybe a bit afraid of raising their hand and saying to their boss that, look, I feel a little bit of the symptoms that you were just saying. I feel a little bit stressed. I feel like my attention is all over the place, and I'd like some help with this. Or do you think that in the workplace culture that actually the culture and this lack of trust and this fear that we have to be producing more, do you think that restricts people from raising their hands and asking for help?
I wouldn't even say it's only fear. It's also, in a sense, kind of pride. People like to be seen to be busy. It makes them feel important. It makes them feel contributing and so on. And part of it is probably that nobody has the time to consider the matter. If you've read Winnie the Pooh, there's this lovely picture at the very beginning where Christopher Robin comes down the stairs and dragging Winnie the Pooh, the teddy bear, behind him by the leg. So the bear bumps his head on every step. And it actually says that sometimes the bear thinks that there may be a better way to come down the stairs if he could only stop bumping and think about it. So, that's a fair description of what's going on in a sense. Every now and then somebody does get it. I managed people. I could see it happen to them. Usually when they're not that young, around maybe 40 plus years, it suddenly occurs to them that they actually should also have life and family and other things. And suddenly they start doing things like actually going home at more sane hours and reacting to all this situation. And that's a good thing to see, but it's a very individual thing, except for those few companies that have the wisdom to do something organized about it.
I know I've put this question kind of at another place, but I'm really interested to know, can you share with the audience any companies that are doing this well, that are kind of actively managing information overload well and in a way that benefits them?
I can give you a few examples, and these are the extreme cases, which is why we know about them. Because there are companies that do small programs in this space, and we can talk about those, but these are the big cases. There is the company Atos in France, which is a kind of 40,000 person global IT company. And their CEO declared a few years ago that just as he got his company to be pollution-free in the green, ecological sense, he wants it to be email-free. Get rid of the email pollution for internal emails, of course. And to his credit, he didn't just say it as a knee-jerk reaction. He allocated resources. He took, I think, 3 years as the time to do it in. He set up a special department to drive the process, and they went throughout the company, department by department, and analyzed what email is being used for, and identified or developed alternative tools that could do it better. And each department that went through this got a certificate that they were email free. And they managed to reduce emails considerably, probably not to zero, but they took quite a chunk out of this problem. So that's one company. Then we have the company called PBD, which is a much smaller company of a few hundred people in Atlanta in the US. And their CEO had his epiphany when he noticed that he's sending email to his admin that was sitting in the cubicle next to his. So, it didn't make sense to him. And he did the best, to date anyway, no email day program, what's also known as Zero Email Friday, where we must keep in mind it's not about not doing email the whole day. It's about trying on that day to prefer talking to people on the phone or face-to-face. And that worked for them so well that I talked to the guy recently that they're still doing it after 7 or 8 years. The employees are happy, productivity went up, their customers are happy. Everybody discovered the joy, apparently, of actual having human interface with people by voice. And there are other companies that did that here and there. So
I think that's a really excellent story. I really love that, and I love also that it contributes to their bottom line. That actually the employees are happy and their customers are happy, which also makes their shareholders happier, I assume.
And they report, because the fear was that, of course, people will not send any email during the Friday, and then the next day they're going to send twice as much because they're going to keep it for then. And that did not happen. Email went down for the whole week, actually. So that's good. Then you have Volkswagen in Germany that shut down the BlackBerry servers after hours, so people would not be able to pull their email on their BlackBerries after hours, which is impressive, and certainly very, very beneficial for work-life balance. And you will note again, all this comes top-down. It's always the manager or the CEO or top management making these decisions. These things never come bottom-up, frankly, unless somebody down below convinces management up at the top.
But that is an interesting thing, that it's a change in mindset from the top down, from the C-suite down, and and that's the way in general that these programs get implemented. And perhaps, as you were saying earlier, for it to come bottom up, from a bottom up, it's, I don't know, that change maker would have to be someone that isn't so affected by the culture of having to send email all the time. And
You have to keep in mind that if we go back to the game theory thing that I mentioned before, the prisoner's dilemma. The way to change the prisoner's dilemma is to change the table of payoffs, right? And only top management can do that. If top management makes it known that anybody who sends a lot of email is going to suffer grievously come next performance review, believe me, people will send less email. But you can't do that from lower than the top level. Because if I have a small group and I get them to send less email, the group next to ours is going to send more email than the layer above us might react to their benefit. But the top manager answers to no one, right? Think of it.
so, I mean, so going back to the technology question again, so we have this problem of information overload, and we've been talking about the idea that this might be a cultural problem as to why this exists. But I'm wondering, Nathan, do you think that there actually might be a design flaw in the way that not only email but our information technologies in general have been designed to fracture our attention?
I would think the technology shouldn't really be blamed. I remember when email started being used in corporations, it was a gift from heaven. I mean, you could, especially me being in a kind of remote country, you could send the message to America and have an answer the next day. It was beautiful. And that's the way email should be used, as an asynchronous tool. The fact that we're using it as if it were basically SMS, where people expect to answer email within seconds of its arrival around the clock, that's us. It's not email's fault. And in fact, there are many technology tools that do a wonderful job for various kinds of situations, like for teamwork in distributed teams and for one-to-one communication and for one-to-many, but they shouldn't be abused. So I think it's 80% culture, not the technology. In fact, the technology is evolving year by year, and there are some very nice tools that help you deal with information overload if you only use them right.
So, what are some of the ways that you would recommend people or companies address the problems that we've been talking about?
So if you're an individual, then there are limits to what you can do. You can only affect your own behavior. And by the way, it's certainly recommended that you craft very clear, short, actionable emails to send to others. Nobody has a great incentive to do that because it's kind of altruistic, but you may actually go to paradise or something eventually. It's a good thing to do. But you can certainly do something about the way you process your incoming messages. And what you should do there, I would say, is first you should decide to do something. This is like quitting smoking. You have to admit that you have a problem. You have to decide to do what it takes to solve your problem. Then you should probably adopt the first solution anyone should adopt, which is to batch email reading. So not respond to email whenever it arrives. Set 1, 2, 3, whatever hours per day at given times. For example, I'm less creative after lunch, so I do my email after lunch. I reserve the morning for thinking work. But somebody else may have a different biological clock or whatever. But you should set specific times each day for reading your inbox and read all your incoming mail during that time at a stretch in batch mode. It's much more productive and effective, and it leaves the rest of the day for thinking. And of course, for doing that, you must turn off all the alerts. So, all the beeps and pings and animations and whatever that make you realize that the new email has arrived. Otherwise, you won't be able to do this. This one tip, by the way, is recognized widely as the most effective thing you can do immediately to make yourself more productive today. And then you should review the technology solutions that are out there that help prioritize your inbox and help you address the mail in the right order. And there are many tools like that out there. So one that I recently like is No Mail. There's a startup called No Mail that has a tool like that. There's some stuff around Gmail. This one is for Outlook, but there's many tools around Gmail actually. In fact, if you look at my website, I once put together an ebook of all the solutions I'm aware of for information overload. There's about 160 of them, and there's a couple dozen in this space of tools that improve the way you process your inbox. So anyone should look at those and decide which one is best for them, for their work style, for their personal preference. Then you can also set some quiet time. Quiet time is the name of a famous experiment that one company did about giving people a few free mornings where they don't interact with others, which worked well. But as an individual, you could decide, say, that the first 2 hours of the morning, you're not dealing with incoming stuff of any kind, or in the afternoon, or one day a week, or whatever. So there's time when you can actually focus on thinking work. And lastly, if you're really brave, you can try to be a change agent and make your organization do something about the problem, and thereby change much more. But as I said, that's you need to be brave. So let me give you some tips for corporations. And I guess the first thing you need to do is you need to have someone high up, as we said before, either the CEO or some kind of VP or department manager of a large department that decides to do something about it and set a goal. And once you have that kind of top-down commitment, they will need to assign an owner and probably a team that will create a solution program. Now, organizations know how to solve problems. So that what I'm telling you now is essentially how you solve problems of any kind in a modern corporation. This team would have to characterize the situation and analyze the root causes and prioritize them and decide what to work on first and define a set of solutions, keeping in mind the company's culture, the company's DNA, so to speak, and involve the employee base as early as possible so they would accept the change when it comes, and ultimately launch a program to do the necessary change in the communication culture, except that you need to do that patiently. I've seen companies do a launch and forget thing where they pay lip service, they put up some posters saying we're going to be very effective from now on, and nothing happens. Of course, that doesn't work.
Okay. So, I'm really interested to know then if we do put these methods in place. I guess also both from a corporate and from an individual perspective, what are some of the benefits that you can expect to see?
So, suppose you had a company, say a factory, and you went to check on the factory and you found that your employees are sitting on their hands doing nothing one day a week. Would you ask what the benefit would be if they're starting to work? Because this is the situation. People are wasting one day a week literally on doing nothing useful. And this is the unnecessary emails and the switching time of the interruptions, actually. When we studied it, we made a serious effort to differentiate useful interruptions and useless interruptions, and most of the damage is in the time the brain switches back and forth for the useless interruptions. It's about 6 hours a week, actually, in a typical company, because people get interrupted on average every 3 minutes, meaning they stop what they're doing and do something else every 3 minutes. This is from research data from the University of California. They went out there and looked at what people were doing for thousands of hours, and this is what they saw. Now, if it takes your brain even only half a minute to get back and you get interrupted every 3 minutes, you can do the math, right? And of course, people would get to see their children, which is kind of nice. Oh, and if you need a number for companies, Basics, the analyst company, characterized it at some point, and they found that the damage to American industry was, I think, $1 trillion or $900 billion a year, just in lost wages, lost time. So it's a lot of money. For a sizable company like a 100,000 person company, you're probably talking around $1 billion. So
That's unbelievable. That's an extraordinary figure. I mean, I know, like, obviously there's some, there's some deviation either side of that, but there's still an extraordinary amount of money and time that people spend just either being interrupted or trying to get their focus back from being interrupted.
Absolutely, yep. And that's without counting the lost creativity and so on, which is probably the worst part.
Do you do this personally as well? Like, do you do, for example, email batching, and are you quite protective of the time that you spend on working on, I don't know, creative work or cognitively demanding work?
Well, like I said, I try to reserve my mornings for the cognitive work. And I'm fairly successful. Of course, when I get up in the morning, I take a peek at my email to see if something urgent came from the other side of the planet or something like that. But I definitely don't do email in the mornings. And yes, I do batch it, actually. And the less important email I batch even better because I actually need to go to one place I work in once a week by bus. So it's like an hour drive each way on the bus, and these buses have Wi-Fi. And I do the email that wasn't important, I clean during those rides.
I love this. So Nathan, what would you say in the digital age are the most important human qualities, and how also can we cultivate them?
Well, this is not only about overload, of course. Perhaps one thing people need to train themselves is to not do things, to let go. It's the notion that not everything needs to be read, not everything needs to be seen, not everything needs to be responded to, and it's okay. That's very difficult, by the way, to impart to people. That there's this innate expectation that I have to see it all, which is one reason why I strongly recommend to people to move anything they can to RSS feeds or similar tools. Because in an RSS reader, there is no expectation that you'll see it all. In an inbox, there is. It's a wrong expectation, but people have it. And once you train yourself not to read anything that might conceivably be of interest to you, then you're good. I mean, you can. In fact, I remember there was a time years ago when I was into neural networks. I mean, I was in charge of some effort studying artificial neural networks, and everybody who had an article about neural networks in the company sent it my way because they knew I was working on it. And I had this pile of articles that kept growing, and I couldn't throw them out because, hey, they're in my field. I need to read them, right, eventually. So when I'm going to have time, on that day, I'm going to read them. And the pile grew higher, and my morale went lower. It was terrible. Until one day it occurred to me that I can throw the entire pile out. And on that mythical day when I'm going to have time, I can buy the best book on the planet on neural networks and read that instead. And the day hasn't come, and everybody is happy. So keep it in mind. You need to be able to let go. It's okay. Nothing terrible is going to happen. And the other skill I think people need is basically digital literacy, search skills. I go around and I show people features even of Google search, the most obvious things, and they're just not aware of them. They don't know they can do that. And search skills are critical, certainly, because there's so much stuff out there. You need to home on the stuff that's going to be useful to you. And that is something that, as far as I'm concerned, I once wrote about it. I think it ought to be a course in universities. You need to teach it in college, if not in high school, if not in elementary school. People need to know how to do those things.
Absolutely. Nathan, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the interview. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
If they have good search skills, or even if they have trivial search skills, they can Google me. I have a website which has a section with resources, and there's a blog there with quite a lot of stuff that came to my mind. I also have a Facebook page, not my personal Facebook profile, the kind of page you can like, basically. So there are some updates there too. And also, I would recommend people look up the Information Overload Research Group, which I've helped found a few years ago, because it has a research center where there's a lot of stuff as well. And that is at iorgforum.org, or just Google the Information Overload Research Group. And anyone with questions is always welcome to email me. You can easily find my email online.
Fantastic. Well, Nathan Zeldes, it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us.